Williams are aboard the Gemini 10 spacecraft at Launch Complex 19, going through a complete series of preliminary checks. They'll be ready to report to the prime pilots later this afternoon when they arrive at the launch pad. Bean and Williams have now been in the spacecraft for about 60 to 70 minutes at this point. Our weather forecast continues to look favorable, and all is proceeding very satisfactorily at this time. Now T-minus 312 minutes and 54 seconds and counting. This is Gemini Launch Control. This is Gemini Launch Control, T-minus 287 minutes, 43 seconds and counting, and all still proceeding excellently with the Gemini 10 countdown. The prime pilots, John Young and Mike Collins, are still abed at the Kennedy Space Center at their crew quarters. If they do remain asleep, they will be awakened at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time this afternoon. The backup pilots, Alan Bean and C.C. Williams, are still aboard the Gemini 10 spacecraft, making the early checkouts at this point. At Launch Complex 14, we are preparing for one of our key steps in the countdown, and that is loading the fuel aboard the Agena second stage. This will begin some 7 minutes from this time as we proceed to load some 4,000 pounds of the unsymmetrical dimethyl hydrazine fuel aboard the Agena. Following the loading of the fuel aboard the Agena stage, we will then remove the gantry service structure and proceed to load the oxidizer, the acid, aboard the Agena stage. Our countdown is continuing and going very satisfactorily at this point. The Gemini spacecraft joined the countdown at the T-minus 360 minute mark, about 70 or 80 minutes ago, and all is proceeding well with the spacecraft. The final key member of the countdown, the Gemini launch vehicle, will be joining us about 40 minutes from this time. When the Gemini launch vehicle comes in on the count of the T-minus 240 minute mark, we'll then have some 9 countdowns going simultaneously for this afternoon's dual launch. The launch times that we have at the present time, based on the data of the orbiting Gemini 8 Agena, and of course also based on later information this afternoon on the status of that Agena and the Agena 10 that we'll be launching this afternoon. The present launch times we have in Eastern Standard Time are 3:39 and 44 seconds p.m. Eastern Standard Time for the Atlas Agena, with a Gemini launch vehicle aiming for 5:20 and 30 seconds p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Now coming up on T-minus 285 minutes, this is Gemini Launch Control. This is Gemini Launch Control, T-minus 282 minutes and 41 seconds and counting. We have just received a report from the crew quarters at the Kennedy Space Center that the prime pilots, John Young and Mike Collins, are now awake, and as a matter of fact, just got up a short time ago. They will start the astronaut portion of the countdown about a half an hour from this time, when they're scheduled to take their physical examination. This will be followed by a lunch at the crew quarters at the Kennedy Space Center. But John Young and Mike Collins now are up. Apparently they had a very good night's sleep. They went to bed about 2 a.m. Eastern Standard Time this morning. This is Gemini Launch Control. This is Gemini Launch Control, T-minus 265 minutes and counting. All proceeding very satisfactorily on the Gemini 10 countdown, as it has for the complete 6 hours and 45 minutes or so that it has been in progress. At this point in the countdown, we are completing the fuel loading aboard the Agena second stage at Launch Complex 14. We're due to complete this about 5 minutes from this time. We will then prepare to move the gantry service structure back to its park position, continue with the count, with the next major item being loading the oxidizer, the acid, aboard the Agena second stage. That will complete the propellant loading of the Agena, and the final propellant loading, the liquid oxygen that comes aboard the Atlas launch vehicle, will come a little later in the count, about an hour or so from this time. Astronauts John Young and Mike Collins, the prime pilots for the mission, are up at the crew quarters at the Kennedy Space Center on Merritt Island. They've been up now for about a half an hour or so. They'll be starting their phase of the countdown at about 1:15 p.m. Eastern Standard Time when they begin their medical examination. This will be followed by their breakfast, which was expected to be the usual astronaut fare of filet mignon, scrambled eggs, toast, and coffee. We'll have a later report on that. The weatherman, in the meantime, gives us a go for the launch as far as the weather conditions here in the Cape Kennedy area and around the worldwide track. All systems looking good at T-minus 263 minutes, 23 seconds, and counting. This is Gemini Launch Control. This is Gemini Launch Control, T-minus 248 minutes, 40 seconds and counting, and we're still proceeding very well with the Gemini 10 countdown. Astronauts John Young and Michael Collins are now taking their pre-flight physical examination at the crew quarters at the Kennedy Space Center. The brief examination is being conducted by two NASA physicians, Drs. D. Owen Coons and Norman Pincott. Drs. Coons and Pincott are conducting the examination. The pilots will be sitting down about 10 or 15 minutes from this time for what will be their breakfast. They woke up on their own at 12:15 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and now, as reported, are taking their physical examination. At Launch Complex 14, we're getting ready to pull back that gantry service tower and bring it to its park position as we continue with the countdown at 14. This will be coming up in about 2 minutes. Take some 30 minutes to get the gantry service structure back. We'll then proceed with we will then continue with our propellant loading of the Agena, that is, loading the acid oxidizer aboard. The backup pilots, astronauts Alan Bean and C.C. Williams, are still aboard the Gemini 10 spacecraft at Launch Complex 19, continuing their checkouts. All still going well, T-minus 247 minutes and counting. This is Gemini Launch Control. This is Gemini Launch Control. We just passed the 240-minute mark in the count. Now T-minus 239 minutes, 37 seconds and counting. All still going well with the dual countdown at this time. The Gemini launch vehicle has just come into the count. It came in at the T-minus 240-minute mark. And this gives us a total of some 9 countdowns now running simultaneously. It will culminate in an Atlas Agena launch at 3:39 p.m. and 44 seconds Eastern Standard Time this afternoon, followed by the Gemini launch vehicle ignition at 5:20 and 30 seconds p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Astronauts John Young and Mike Collins have just completed their physical examination and should be sitting down to their breakfast shortly at the crew quarters at the Kennedy Space Center in Merritt Island. Our weather forecast looks very good. We will have some scattered clouds in the launch area, some low scattered clouds at 2,500 feet, and another layer of scattered clouds at about 15,000 feet. A visibility of 10 miles and the sea state off the Cape is about 2 to 3 feet. Winds will be from the northeast at about 12 miles per hour with gusts up to 18 miles per hour. The weatherman forecasts a very low probability of any thunder showers this afternoon that could affect the launch operations. There may be some thunder showers in the general east central Florida area, but he doesn't expect any thunder showers or lightning will affect us this afternoon at complexes 14 and 19. On the remainder of the wide world track, all the weather looks good. We have scattered clouds in both the east and west Atlantic and about similar conditions in the Pacific Ocean. So we are go as far as weather is concerned. Now T-minus 237 minutes, 53 seconds and counting. This is Gemini Launch Control. This is Gemini Launch Control, T-minus 228 minutes, 41 seconds and counting. All still proceeding very well at complexes 14 and 19 for today's Gemini 10 mission. The prime pilots, John Young and Mike Collins, are now sitting down to their breakfast at the crew quarters at the Kennedy Space Center. The breakfast or lunch menu, consists of a filet mignon, scrambled eggs, toast, and coffee. Their guests for their luncheon this afternoon are astronaut Gene Cernan, who was the Gemini 9 pilot, and on this mission is acting as Stony. That's the call sign for the capsule communicator in the blockhouse of Complex 19. Also having lunch is astronaut Jim Lovell, who will be the Gemini 12 command pilot, and of course was the pilot on the Gemini 7 mission. And the final member of the party is Donald K. Slayton, who is Director of Flight Crew Operations for the Manned Spacecraft Center. The crew is having their breakfast or lunch at this time and will be departing from the crew quarters at about an hour from this time. They have completed their physical examination. They have been given a clean bill of health by Doctors Owen Coons and Norman Pincott, who conducted the brief examination at the crew quarters. In the meantime, at Complex 14, the gantry service structure is moving back and should be in its park position shortly. The crew then will start the final propellant loading of the Agena for the second stage. That is loading the acid oxidizer aboard the Agena stage. All still going well at Complex 19 with the backup pilots, astronauts Alan Bean and C.C. Williams, still aboard the Gemini 10 spacecraft. This is Gemini Launch Control. This is Gemini Launch Control, T-minus 210 minutes, 43 seconds and counting. We're still proceeding very well with the Gemini 10 countdown at complexes 14 and 19. All systems looking good at this time as we continue to load the acid oxidizer, the final propellant loading of the Agena second stage at complex 14. Meanwhile, at complex 19, we're starting to clear the flight room for the launch vehicle pressurization. That is the nitrogen pressurization of the Gemini launch vehicle, which will be coming up 20 to 25 minutes from this time. The backup pilots, Alan Bean and C.C. Williams, who have been in the spacecraft for some 3 hours, have just departed from the White Room. They'll come back in again after the vehicle has been pressurized. The prime pilots for the mission, John Young and Mike Collins, still at their crew quarters at the Kennedy Space Center, having their lunch at the present time. They'll be leaving the crew quarters about a half an hour from this time for the ready room, that trailer at Launch Complex 16, where they will don their suits and make their final preparations for the mission. All systems looking good at this time. T-minus 209 minutes, 36 seconds and counting. This is Gemini Launch Control. This is Gemini Launch Control, T-minus 201 minutes, 42 seconds and counting, all still going well with the Gemini 10 countdown. Astronauts John Young and Mike Collins still at their crew quarters at the Kennedy Space Center. They're finishing up their lunch and they'll be departing some 25 minutes from this time for the ready room at Launch Complex 16. We have cleared the White Room at Launch Complex 19 as we begin to gear up at that pad to pressurize the Gemini launch vehicle. Prior to pressurizing the vehicle, which will come about 15 minutes from this time, we will connect the destruct system initiators on the launch vehicle itself. We used dummy initiators during the early checks of the countdown, but now the actual connections are made at this point in the count. At Launch Complex 14, we are proceeding very well with the acid oxidizer fueling of the second stage. That is, bringing the oxidizer aboard to the Agena second stage to complete the propellant loading. That should be completed in about 15 or 20 minutes from this time. All going very well in the count, 200 minutes, 39 seconds and counting. This is Gemini Launch Control. This is Gemini Launch Control, T-minus 193 minutes, 42 seconds, and proceeding very well with the Gemini 10 mission at this time. We have just completed acid oxidizer aboard the second stage of the Atlas vehicle, that is the Agena stage, and we completed it in good time, some 25 minutes to load it aboard. So we've completed our propellant loading of the Agena stage at 14. Meanwhile, at Launch Complex 19, we're gearing up for the launch vehicle pressurization, which will be coming up in a matter of minutes from this time. Astronauts John Young and Mike Collins still at their crew quarters at the Kennedy Space Center. They'll be departing for the ready room in about 16 or 17 minutes from this time. Now T-minus 193 minutes and counting. This is Gemini Launch Control. This is Gemini Launch Control with T-minus 178 minutes, 42 seconds and counting. Gemini 10 pilots John Young and Mike Collins are on their way to the ready room at Launch Complex 16. They departed from their crew quarters at the Kennedy Space Center about 5 minutes ago. Shortly after they do arrive at the ready room, they'll get a briefing on the status of the mission. Participating in that briefing will be the backup pilots, Alan Bean and C.C. Williams. They may or may not be there, but the astronauts will be briefed on the status of the mission, and they'll be told that in these 8.5 hours or so that the countdown has been in progress, that all has been going excellently with the countdowns both at Launch Complex 14 and Complex 19. At this point in the countdown, we are pressurizing, or just completed pressurizing, the Gemini launch vehicle, and the crews will be coming back into the pad area shortly. We do clear the pad area during this pressurization when we pressurize the tanks in both stages of the Gemini launch vehicle with nitrogen. All going well at this point in the count, T-minus 177 minutes, 35 seconds and counting. This is Gemini Launch Control. Launch Control, T-minus 171 minutes, 42 seconds and counting, all still going well with our simultaneous countdown at this time. The prime crew, astronauts John Young and Mike Collins, have arrived at the Ready Room at Complex 16, and where they'll start donning their spacesuits. They will actually come aboard the Gemini 10 spacecraft at about the 125-minute mark in the count. All systems still going well, both at complexes 14 with the Atlas Agena and 19 with the Gemini launch vehicle and spacecraft at this time. We're aiming for a launch of the Atlas Agena at 3:39 and 44 seconds p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Because of the status of the Agena 8 spacecraft in the overall Gemini 10 mission, we will have a window of some 27 minutes and 20 seconds in order to launch from the time that was just announced. The Gemini launch vehicle will have a T-minus 0, that is ignition, at 5:20 and 30 seconds p.m. Eastern Standard Time. This is if all goes well and there are no problems encountered. If we do get off perfectly on that time, the whole time at the T-minus 3-minute mark will last some 5 minutes and 46 seconds. We're now at T-minus 170 minutes, 22 seconds and counting. This is Gemini Launch Control. This is Gemini Launch Control. We're at T-minus 164 minutes, 41 seconds and counting, all still proceeding very well with our dual countdowns. The backup pilots, Alan Bean and C.C. Williams, have returned to the Gemini 10 spacecraft. The pressurization of the Gemini launch vehicle has just been completed, and we are in a go condition at both launch pads at this time. Coming up at Launch Complex 14, now that we have the propellants aboard the Agena spacecraft, will be a guidance command test of some 10 minutes duration. It's one of the final major checks of the radio command guidance system that carries the Atlas Agena, or actually the Agena stage, into orbit. All systems still going well at this time in the count. We're now at T-minus 163 minutes, 56 seconds and counting. This is Gemini Launch Control.
This is Gemini Control Houston, 59 minutes and 42 seconds away from the Agena launch. The launch team of flight controllers has moved into the control center here in Houston. They came to work approximately 45 minutes ago. 4 hours previous to that, flight controllers have been working the stations here, checking around the world. And the flight director, Glenn Lunny, who will be on duty for the launch, has just polled the various stations, and he gets reports like these. Recovery room reports, we're ready in all respects. We even have good weather for you all the way around the globe. The voice levels to all the stations are exactly what they should be this afternoon. The only equipment problem we show right now in the network status is a data processor at the Grand Turk station. They're estimating that this data processor will be ready to support the launch about 20 minutes from now. At 58 minutes away from the Agena launch, we'll switch now to the Cape for an update there.
This is Gemini Launch Control at the Cape. We're at T-minus 153 minutes, 25 seconds and counting, all still going very well at complexes 14 with the Atlas Agena and complex 19 with the Gemini launch vehicle and spacecraft. Astronauts John Young and Mike Collins still in the ready room at complex 16 where they're checking out their spacesuits at this time. Their backups, Alan Bean and C.C. Williams, still aboard the Gemini 10 spacecraft, making final checks. They'll be ready to report to the prime pilots when they come aboard some 25 to 30 minutes from this time. The next highlight coming up at Launch Complex 14 will be the final propellant loading. That is, loading the liquid oxygen aboard the Atlas vehicle. This comes at about the T-minus 140-minute mark in the count, or 45 minutes prior to the planned Atlas Agena liftoff. We're aiming once again to report, once again, the liftoff time is 3:39 and 44 seconds p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Now T-minus 152 minutes, 23 seconds and counting. This is Gemini Launch Control. This is Gemini Launch Control, T-minus 144 minutes and 42 seconds and counting. We're some 50 minutes away from the planned Atlas Agena liftoff, the first of 2 key launches today on the Gemini 10 mission. All systems still going well, both the complexes 14 and 19, as they have throughout the complete countdown today. We now have 9 different countdowns involved in this simultaneous count. All of them are going well. We're gearing up at Launch Complex 14 to prepare for the liquid oxygen loading, which will come up about 5 minutes from this time. At Launch Complex 19, they've just completed a series of telemetry checks with the Air Force Eastern Test Range between the range and the launch vehicle. Those also have gone very well. All systems still looking good at 144 minutes and counting. This is Gemini Launch Control. This is Gemini Launch Control, T-minus 133 minutes, 41 seconds and counting. We're now some 39 minutes away from the planned Atlas Agena liftoff. All still going well at complexes 14 and 19 as our simultaneous countdown continues. At Launch Complex 14, some 5 minutes ago, we started loading the liquid oxygen supply aboard the Atlas vehicle. This is the oxidizer that burns with the so-called RP-1 fuel that was loaded aboard the Atlas several days ago. We'll be loading some 18,500 gallons of liquid oxygen aboard the vehicle and loading it at about 2,000 gallons a minute until we reach the 95% supply. Then we will continue to top off down to several minutes before the planned liftoff. Because of the extremely low temperature of the liquid oxygen, it will boil off and we must continue to replenish the supply down to the final moments before liftoff. At Launch Complex 19, astronaut C.C. Williams has just been reading out a status report from the spacecraft to the blockhouse concerned with the fuel cell. He's been giving a series of readings on its status. All appears to be going well at this time. The astronauts are due to depart from their ready room some 15 minutes from this time. Now T-minus 132 minutes, 24 seconds and counting. This is Gemini Launch Control. This is Gemini Launch Control, T-minus 124 minutes, 43 seconds and counting. Some 30 minutes away from the Atlas Agena liftoff at this point in the countdown. Also at this point, the prime pilots, astronauts John Young and Mike Collins, should be just about ready to leave the ready room at Launch Complex 16 to proceed to Pad 19 and their Gemini 10 spacecraft. In progress at Launch Complex 14 at this time is a check of the autopilot system of the Atlas launch vehicle. The autopilot is the system that swivels the engines in flight to give it proper direction. During this test, which lasts about 15 minutes or so, we actually will swivel those engines at the base of the Atlas.